Hi, my name is Anita Nowak, and I'm the author of this book. Welcome to Season 11 of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I'm joined by Jen Marr, who is the founder and CEO of Inspiring Comfort. After 30 years of experience in business, leadership, development, and the healthcare industry, she is focused on providing solutions to our current mental health crisis. In a field currently dominated by self-care solutions and emotion-based training, she addresses the empathy to action gap through what she calls the awkward zone. Jen is also the author of Showing Up, a comprehensive guide to comfort and connection. Do you mind showing us your fabulous book, which argues that intentional connection within our homes and workplaces, schools, neighborhoods, and communities is actually what enables us to have emotional resilience? I'm so thrilled to have you. Welcome to the show, Jen.
Thank you so much, Anita. I'm so happy to be here.
I always love discovering the backstory of people who are called into the space of empathy work or, showing up work. So I wonder whether or not there's one for you that you would like to share.
Well, thank you, because I think it's a great way to start our conversation, because this is not something I had planned to set out to do. Life is just one journey. And my background is in business development, international business development. I've lived all over the world. Developing businesses. But I took a career break. I have 3 young daughters living in Connecticut. And during that time, I was less than 15 miles away from Sandy Hook Elementary when that tragic shooting happened, and ended up in a very roundabout way getting involved in supporting the aftermath of that shooting, and spent 5 years every week in that school, bringing support and care to the teachers, the students, the parents. And it was only 4 months after that tragic shooting happened that I was running the Boston Marathon. I was actually running it and training for it, like as a way to process everything that was happening at Sandy Hook. And who could have known that I was less than a half mile from the finish line when the bombs went off. And I think being thrown into this world of so much crisis and trauma, on the one hand, being there to support it, on the other hand, needing it myself, and just looking at this world and what was happening on the ground in both of these cases, and how were we trying to rehabilitate these communities and bring support. I found that I was standing in this gap. I have my business development background kind of kicked in, and I was seeing that, take Sandy Hook. Everybody cared about Sandy Hook. Like, everybody wanted to do something. And yet I was in that school every day, and people felt so alone and so unseen. And we had this backdrop of millions or hundreds of thousands of people sending stuff, sending 65,000 teddy bears to a town of 20,000 people, warehouses of bikes and books and just stuff. And it made me realize that there's this gap forming of people that care, but yet people that are really struggling are not met. Those people needing care because they just are not quite sure how to cross that bridge. And so I noticed, the programs on the ground, things like random acts of kindness, however well-intentioned, and really in many cases, they're beautiful programs. But when you're dealing with someone deeply suffering, random is not helpful. And, or even emotional training programs, training for empathy and compassion, beautiful, essential training. I was seeing people had it in those cases. When people are suffering deeply, that's when you see empathy come out, but they didn't know how to apply it. And so I really started just taking these trauma-based schools, because I was also at the same time doing deployments in other schools as well, and just saying, what now? What happens now? I had the luxury of going to Sandy Hook every week for 5 years, but on other deployments, if it was a suicide or a drug overdose, a car accident, a cancer death, an average deployment is 72 hours, and then it's get back to normal, get those kids back in a classroom with an empty desk. And there's no one is preparing these students. They didn't know how to support each other. And mostly caring deeply when a student was lost or a faculty member was lost or a community member was lost, but just a deer in the headlights when it came to having no clue what to do. So that's really where my work started. And it's 10 years later now, and have developed process, written books, done research studies, all to that end.
Wow. I did not know all of that before jumping on the call with you. Now it's not just a call to action. I mean, this is like a profound shift that happened in your life that called you to this work. Oh my goodness. I really cannot wait to read your book. You want to hold it up one more time? I think everybody needs to get their hands on this book.
Well,
Showing up. Oh my gosh. Can I just ask an unplanned follow-up question, just because I haven't met anyone who has worked so closely with the school and the teachers and the community. I just am curious how, this is me projecting, how outraged everybody must have been about people who actually dismissed that it ever happened. And then how validating it must have felt when the case was won against, like, I don't even remember his name, and he doesn't even deserve to have his name mentioned, like, to just spew such just vile lies.
Oh, it was horrible. And yeah, it's validating 10 years later. But I think what happens when there's such a tragedy of such scale, like imagine a town with 21st graders that were lost. It was beyond comprehension. And there was so much trauma going on that it really was every day just taking that next step. And my job as a supporter going in there, the conspiracy theories almost took a back seat just to the fact that 26 beautiful people were gone, and that was just infuriating, of course, but that takes a second seat when you've got people that are so desperately hurting that you just want to be there to support and help them through and validate their pain and acknowledge what they're going through. But it added a layer of pain. So many things, as you know, add layers of pain to trauma, crisis, and loss, and they're very different for very different people. And I think part of what happened at Sandy Hook is there were so many different areas that were painful for people. One family wanted to get politically active in gun control laws, as an example, to pay tribute, whereas other families would be very angry that their story of their daughter was taken to a political level where they wanted to do something much different path. And so, there was just so many layers and complexities within that. And what I learned was when you go in just with an open heart to just genuinely care for everyone, all of that goes away. And when we deal, with our empathetic feelings and putting those into play and just caring for each other, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. It doesn't matter what laws you support. It doesn't matter. It's the thing that binds us and ties us together. It's the thing that makes us human and keeps us going every single day. And so I just was razor sharp focused on that because that was my role. I had no other role in that tragedy or in that school. And so I tried to keep those other arguments and such outside of the realm of my work.
Yeah. And I know that so much about what we're going to talk about is sort of like a hopeful applied empathy. I think it's such an important message that you have to share, with the backdrop knowing that crises are happening all the time. And there are tons of people that, whether it's, a circumstance like Sandy Hook, but also just recently, like the earthquake in Turkey, right, where tens of thousands of people lost their lives. So there's many, many places where this work is important and in our day-to-day life. So you say it's not a secret that we're in a mental health crisis, and you believe that we must supplement self-care and professional help with the critical skill of supportive care, a skill that equips us to show up
for one another, and you show up, you really emphasize that in our everyday life through struggles and suffering. And so why is that more important now than ever?
Mm. Well, it kind of dives into the lane that I'm in, right? And I think right now with the mental health crisis, everyone's trying so desperately to find solutions and tackle it. And I think part of that is to understanding what areas do we all have to tackle. And so when I look at it in the work we've done these last 10 years, I kind of look at mental wellness in three different buckets. I think if you visualize on the far left, you have professional therapy and counseling and social workers, which are so critical, very, very critical to our mental wellness. And then on the right side, we'll talk about self-care. We'll talk about regulating our emotions, um, meditation, breathing, yoga, anything that is inward looking to help ourselves. And I will call that the barbell approach. And I think over the last couple decades, I think those two areas have just grown exponentially and have been really good to help solve our mental health challenges. My area, though, is when we only use the barbell approach, where we have the feeling that I can regulate my emotions, I can take care of myself, and if I'm struggling, I'll go see a mental health professional. In my observations, it actually is growing the mental health crisis because we live in and around our people. We live in and around our family and our coworkers and our bosses and our classmates and our professors and our friends and our neighbors. And 24/7, we're around those people, and our bodies are wired to need their acknowledgement and their validation and their support and their care. And so I think I love the two barbells, don't get me wrong, but my area and what I tackle is this supportive care and this area that we have to know how to support each other through our struggles because it's where we live every day.
Hey, I don't mean to interrupt a great conversation. I just want to draw attention to the fact that there are over 120 equally awesome conversations of my podcast and YouTube series on my channel. Please subscribe. The world needs more empathy, and you have a role to play.
So you talk about this empathy to action gap and what you call the awkward zone. What is that all about exactly?
Well, it's that gap I was talking about, Anita, when I felt it out on the field and then I went to study it to acknowledge it. A lot of times, excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. As an expert in empathy, you know all this. So we can have these feelings. I kind of look at empathy, compassion, sympathy, and you can look about apathy as well, right? The emotions of care or not caring. I think sometimes when we talk about that emotion and if people feel like if I get empathy down, I'm going to reach that person that needs care. And I noticed this gap. So the gap basically is the opposing emotions that come into play against those good emotions. So for every feeling of empathy, you're going to have a feeling of, I'm not sure it's the right time. I don't know if I'm the right person. You might be deflecting. I don't think I'm the right, it's not my place to step in. It's not my job. I don't think I should do that. I have no idea what to say. I don't know if it's the right time. And so what I have done over the last 10 years is dove into this gap, these opposing emotions that stop us. And then also then what verb, what action are we going to apply to give us the confidence to overcome that? So I kind of look at, I care, but what do I do? I care, but what do I say? I care. I don't think it's the right time. I care. I don't think I'm the right person. And it's back and forth and back and forth. So as we've broken this down, over the last 10 years, we've broken this awkward zone down into two different layers. The first layer we would just call our emotional barriers that stop us from doing anything. We talk ourselves out of it, right? And if we talk ourselves out of helping, it's either going to be because we're doubtful, or driven by fear, driven by doubt, or we're deflecting, which is more driven by denial. It's not my place to step in. It's not my role, or I've got my own problems, or I this on. So those things will stop an incredible amount of people from doing anything in the first place. Boom, just like that, their emotions have stopped them from acting. And so the second layer then is actually our responding behaviors. So now let's say you're a boss and you've got someone in your office that was just diagnosed with cancer, right? If you mess up the action to care for that person, to make them feel seen, and heard and valued and cared for, you will have fallen into one of two buckets. One is either falling into what we would call the fixer, right? The fixer is, oh my gosh, you have to go see this doctor. And, my sister-in-law did this. And when I did it, I did that. And very much invalidating and not listening to someone or trying to cheer them up. And the other hand is, we all know it, leaves the elephant in the room, that will have that meeting and will not even bring the subject up. We'll talk about anything but the diagnosis. And so in studying this for 10 years, every group we work with, we assess and we kind of dive into these behaviors. And the goal is to normalize the language, right? The goal is we're all going to fall into these behaviors. We do it every day. We'll all fall into these buckets for the rest of our lives because we're all just so flawed humans. And so, but the goal is, if we can, say, "Oh, I'm trying to fix it," or, "Okay, I'm deflecting." Out in the workplace, deflection is a big deal because it didn't used to be the job of the workplace to support the person in their mental health, but now it is a very big role. So we have to help them identify, okay, well, I'm just deflecting that. I am not required to fix it, but I am needed to validate and acknowledge it. So that's kind of, 10 years of work summed up in that little nut. The awkward zone is the pushback on those carrying emotions. And so we need to teach the skills to give the confidence to break through that, to reach the person that needs care.
So what are some of the skills? I'm just really curious, like 2-3 strategies for showing up through the awkward zone.
Well, so what we do is we have an assessment. So if I were to go into your workplace, we would do, we have 2 different assessments. One's an anonymous kind of a culture assessment. How cared for are they feeling in the workforce? Where do they feel least cared for? How equipped do they feel to care for others? And so we look at that data, but then we also have a personal assessment. So you would take a personal assessment that kind of puts you in these different scenarios, and will help you identify how you respond. It's just self-reported measures. And we send you a report then of, here is kind of like where you fall into your comfort zone. These are the things you tend to say you're good at. And these are the areas that you tend to say you're awkward in. And so for every single one of those barriers that we look at, there are tips, tools, and actions from the book that you can apply against it, right? So as an example, if you're a fixer, which a lot of people in the workplace are fixers, right? One of the tips and tools we have is remember the pause filter. The pause filter is just an acronym. And we say, for P, are you present? Have you removed all your distractions? Are you being emotionally available to this person? A, are you giving advice when it's not being asked for? Are you unloading your own problems? Because that's another thing that fixers will tend to do is, oh my gosh, well, this is going on in my life too. So are you unloading? S, are you staying with the mood? Sometimes when someone's face to face with someone, they just immediately want to cheer them up. And so we really want to tell people, just stay with the mood. If they're down, stay there. If they're happy, stay there. And E, are you keeping the emphasis on the person you're talking to? Because so often in these kinds of conversations, it's so easy to pull the attention back on ourselves. So that's like one little tip. We talk about focus grabbing. We talk about looking at the whole body when we care for someone, and we have a whole section on how to watch for someone, how to look for signs, how to pay attention to different things. A very deep chapter on active listening and we actually assess against that, and what are the things that actually stop you from listening, to pay attention to those. We talk about writing care, whether that's a text or social media or letters or emails or cards. We talk about showing up with our feet and what actions sometimes are better than saying anything, which then leads to the mouth, and really focusing a lot on we should think about twice before we say it. And then what are some things that are okay to say?
Oh my gosh, such practical book on top of it. A needed and practical book. Okay. I wonder whether or not you could speak a little bit about the science of human care, since you've done such a rich dive over the last decade. Like, what are some of the things you've learned that you think are fascinating?
Oh my goodness. Well, it's so relevant right now, especially after COVID. And you're very well aware of all this. So it's when we're struggling, when we're suffering, when we're under stress, our body floods with the hormone cortisol. And our bodies need to offset that cortisol with oxytocin, which is our human bonding hormone. It is the number one reason why the U.S. Surgeon General has said social connectedness is what is so critical right now, as is the CEO of the American Psychological Association. Because what happens sometimes in our world of connections, we're missing the difference between genuine caring relationships and just our general connections. We can be in a workplace as a doctor or a nurse or a lawyer and be connected for a living. We could be caring for people for a living, but it could be a profession that is completely flooding our body with cortisol. And so we have to recognize that it's the social connections. It's the people that when we actually get down to care about them and connect with them, that releases the oxytocin. There's this great TED talk by Kelly McGonigal from Stanford University that even talks about when your body releases a lot of cortisol, it actually also releases oxytocin as a trigger for connection. And it's that feeling like, I need to share this or I'm going to burst. I've got to get this off my chest. And so what we're finding, and I know you see this too, is with technology and with COVID and the isolation and the loneliness and the separation with screens, is that is so much harder now. And it's so hard for especially youth to come out of that awkward zone. I mean, it's for Gen Z, even having a conversation is awkward. And so it's training these skills so that people are comfortable opening up and sharing and discussing what's going on with each other so that they can get that oxytocin release. And so we have to have those skills then in order to make that happen.
Yeah, I was very surprised to learn that the generation that's coming into my classes now, the youngest of the undergrads, so let's say 19, 20, actually have anxiety around calling people on the phone. Like they just don't know how to do it. And if it's a cold call, it's like very, very anxiety provoking. So I'm curious to know if the learning of your 10 years and all the programs that you've put into place and the book you've written, or the books actually, I wonder what all the learning has meant for you in your life, how it's changed you, your relationships, the dynamics, like, how have you shifted gears a little bit through all of this?
Such a good question. And it really does go back to living through what I now teach. And I'll give you an example of that. One of the things, I'll give you a couple examples. One of the first eye openers for me was, at Sandy Hook, after I had been there, every day almost for 4 months, and then Boston happened. It was my new friends at Sandy Hook that all of a sudden took to comforting me. And there was a real shared bond from that point on of our shared struggles together. And people that I never knew before became some of my deepest, dearest friends. And understanding that this is how we're wired. We're wired to care for each other. We're wired to go through our hard times together. We're wired to be there for each other. And, when I moved from Sandy Hook to Virginia, 5-6 years after the tragedy, and I had made all these friends, I started sending texts every day. I would create images with just an encouraging thought because I wanted to stay in touch. We teach the marble jar, which is basically if someone's struggling, they need a lot of marbles in their jar, not one big marble. And so I knew I needed to continue to put marbles in their jars, and in a very intentional but non-intrusive way is to send an image and just with an encouraging thought. And I started that, and I've been doing those every day, and my list has grown. And I do it every morning before I start my day. And right now I'm on an 8-week kind kind of a stay in Austin, Texas for the winter. And I thought, when I'm down in Austin, I'm going to put those images aside and I'm just going to really focus on some deep dive learning and writing, and I'm not going to do those images. And I'll tell you what, I'm 6 weeks into it and I feel different. Like I miss it. I miss those connections. I miss those, the focus on others. When I start my day off now, just focusing on myself and my work, I'm missing what's happening in people's lives, and I'm missing caring for them. And it so underscores how our body's wired, that when we are only focused on self, we feel more empty. We feel like we're missing out on things. We feel like I'm missing those essential connections I have to live my best life. And so it's funny that you asked that question, because I was just thinking about that. I'm like, yeah, I'm ready to get back at them, even though it's a lot of work every day. It does really bring fulfillment.
I'm touched by this. You're the first person I've heard talk about this. So how long, let's just get, for curiosity's sake, how long would it take you to send all of the messages to all the various people? It's like a 20-minute thing or a 40-minute thing every morning, or?
It depends if I put a message with it. Sometimes I'll just create the image, but I have good news. So I've been doing them one by one because I always have wanted this individual connection. It's grown, the list has grown to like 100 people. I can do it quite quickly. I can get them usually out in 45 minutes. But some of the research I did down here is I think I found an app that I can send them out more quickly. But I still don't want to lose that ability. If I know someone's going through chemotherapy, I want to add a special little note, like just like how's today. And that's one of my favorite things is, once a week or once a month, I'll just say, how's today? And just get that personal touch. Instead of just a blanket text to go everywhere else. So I need to make sure that functionality is in there. But it's incredible how, it's how our bodies are wired. And that, like when you give, you receive, when you help, you get help back. And that is integral to the process, that the evidence-based process we created with teaching this skill, which is a combination of perspective taking, but also efficacy with that intentional connection with that person that's struggling.
I think that's such a beautiful ritual, and it makes me adore you. I girl crush all over you. And at the same time, I absolutely know that there is this reciprocity, this karma in the universe, whether you put it in the spiritual dimension or not, just the sense that there is a sweetness that comes to you, where your body physiologically is actually better. You're healing something in the act of caring for others. Like the science is resolute about that. So I think it's just, I wish more people understood that, this generosity and caring and empathy is a dynamic, reciprocal activity that would help us.
Yeah, it's true. I'm not getting that oxytocin release in the morning. It's that reward center where I know I've helped someone and they help me back. Right. Yeah, it's very, very scientific.
So what we're going to do is we're going to include the link to the TED Talk that you mentioned. If you could send me the link to that app, we'll also include it in the description notes, and of course, how to get your book. I have a last question. We could continue to talk, but this has been so lovely. I love these interviews because I always feel flooded with the good feels, I wonder if you could share a story, Jen, from your own life about when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you.
Oh my goodness. Well, I shared one of them, which was really when everything just came together. Okay, so let me go 5 years out from that. So I shared with you when Boston happened. And of course, the people that supported me most were the teachers and students in that school, and the parents. But 5 years later, I needed to move to Virginia for my husband's new job. And 5 years of showing up at a school and supporting people and creating these programs. And, we had very, very deep relationships. And they gave me a going away party. And oh my gosh, I'll get emotional if I think about it. But this journal that they wrote, it was in that moment that I realized that showing up is everything. It was never one little thing I did. It was never one, really all I did was show up and say, how was today? I mean, I wasn't a trained counselor. I wasn't practicing mindfulness. I was there literally as comfort and support for them. And what they wrote back to me, and taking this journal, because I was struggling, I didn't want to move away. And it was just the most beautiful thing. And it was really a catalyst at that point to write my book, and understanding that caring for others is just an accumulation of so many small little things. And that's what we have to be focused on every single day, is just millions of little things. And that's why we call them marbles. And I had put thousands of marbles in their jar, and then they were giving them all right back to me.
I have loved every minute of our conversation, Jen. I love the work you do. I'm so happy to amplify it within my network north of the border. I hope you have a wonderful time in Austin, and that you get back to your routine in the morning, and I might see whether I could fit some of that in too. It's been such an extraordinary honor to have this conversation. Thank you.
I loved it as well. And thank you, Anita, for all your beautiful work and your passion in this area. It's so needed.
Well, thanks for listening and watching. We'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
Thanks so much for watching another episode of Purposeful Empathy. Please subscribe to my channel. Please consider buying a copy of Purposeful Empathy. Remember, the world needs more empathy, and you have a role to play.